Well, hey, friends. Hope you're doing well. This is a little bit like a going in after the game and giving a post game press conference. So you can determine for yourself whether it's a win or a loss. But Sunday morning, right after preaching Matthew 6, 1 through 4, on giving to the needy and particularly our motives in that text. So just wanted to groups for this week. Really, over the last couple of weeks, the subject matter in loving our enemies, praying for those who persecute us, and today giving to the needy really presses us at a number of levels of core conviction as we think about what it looks like to demonstrate this other centered love, particularly to those who are hard to love, whether that's our enemies or the needy among us. As a small group leader, I've found particularly good fruit in considering gender time along those lines. Who is God pressing you to love? Where are your challenges with this? I think this morning's sermon gives us a great opportunity to use our small group to consider our motives. How does sin affect our motives and even the good things that we do? Obviously, in this morning's text, we see that it affects our motives in that we tend to do them for the praise of people rather than for the affirmation of God. But you could begin a small group discussion around that. How are your motives at work in your actions and your practice of righteousness? How do you see improper motives at play? How does the Spirit challenge us at the level of motives? This morning, the perhaps the cryptic phrase is doing what you do in secret. And so I pressed on this notion that that doesn't mean we don't do anything because somebody might notice, but we really weren't able to plumb the depths of what does it mean to do those things in secret. What would it look like for your left hand not to know what your right hand is doing? How does that demonstrate itself in our giving, in our prayers, and a host of other areas? So I think you could have a really healthy discussion around there. An alternative suggestion, and what I did with my group this past week, is we talked about the role of short-term missions since the church is highlighting those mission opportunities. And I read from two sections in the book of Philippians, two passages in Philippians 3, the second half of that chapter, and then in chapter 4, I believe it's beginning in verse 10 through the end of the chapter. And there, Paul speaks of the value of agents from the church and encouraging his ministry, the way that he wants to send people back to the church. And so, one of the things we did is we talked about the value or the ways that we see the church in the New Testament being a part of mission sending. Areas like prayer, generous giving, sending agents back and forth, consistent encouragement, bodily presence, bringing practical needs to Paul and to others. So we kind of itemized those, and then we talked about some of the challenges with short-term missions in our day. If this is what it looks like to be on mission, for the church to be a part of missions, what are some challenges with that? We talked about others living with other centeredness that is just kind of out of sight, out of mind. We talked about stewarding resources and how short term trips can promote this Christian tourism that isn't really about others, and kind of brainstorm some of those. And then we attempted to say, well, okay, what does it? Obviously, we can't abandon the work of missions just because of these challenges, but what would it look like for a church to be intentional about promoting missionaries around the world? And so we, talked about vetting projects so that we knew we were using resources well, then being people that we know, team size being limited so that we were actually going to accomplish something, reporting back to the church so that they knew what was involved. Okay, you see the point. So it provided a really good opportunity for me to share about the short-term mission trips, which you have on the website at tccherrydale/go, and just provided us a great opportunity to brainstorm short-term missions opportunities. So those are two good ideas in the area of motives and in the area of short-term missions that you could take to capitalize on the work of this week's sermon and where we are in the Sermon on the Mount. Obviously, next week we'll turn our attention to prayer. So if your group is already kind of forward-facing there, I think one of the easiest things to do would just be to use the 7 arrows to walk through the Lord's Prayer, and specifically this back end and this front end and back end, pray in secret, and the back end, this passage about forgiving others and your Father forgiving you. So sandwich all that together, you could kind of use the 7 errors to guide a good large group discussion through that text. So I hope that's helpful. Really appreciate all that you all do to build up our church. Blessings.